G'day and welcome to Reality Check. I'm your host, Ross Coulthart. Today I'm going to talk to you about the new movie, Age of Disclosure, the much long-awaited UAP film featuring a brace, I think 34 so-called government insiders, telling all about the UAP mystery. It's a film made by Hollywood producer-director Dan Farrar and Lou Elizondo. Lou was very key early on as an executive producer in bringing people from within the defence intelligence establishment and getting their agreement to appear on camera. And it's great to finally see this film finally making it to both a limited theatrical release and to a streaming release on Amazon Prime. So you'll be able to see it from the 21st of November this year, 2025. It's going to be released in selected cinemas, very, very limited in Washington, D.C., New York, and LA. And it's also going to be appearing on Amazon Prime for rental or purchase. And I strongly recommend everyone here watch it and tell all your friends, tell your neighbours, tell everyone, watch The Age of Disclosure. Not because it's going to tell you, a UAP knowledgeable person, anything new. If you watch Reality Check, you'll already know a lot of what The Age of Disclosure film discloses. What is significant is what the Age of Disclosure film will tell to the average Joe citizen. It's one of the first opportunities for a well-made, definitive, objective UAP film to present the evidence for the UAP mystery to the general public in a way that hopefully will seize their imagination. So, what do we know about it? We know that it's positing the conspiracy theory that I don't think is a conspiracy theory because that's almost a pejorative, that there's been an 80-year cover-up of a covert UAP non-human technology retrieval program of craft and biologics bodies, that the US government has been and continues to be involved in the retrieval of non-human technology and trying to reverse engineer it. And boy, I think what the biggest weight in the film are the people who appear. We don't know the name of everyone in the film who appears because we're all running blind to some degree. There's only a few very limited accounts of what people saw at the South by Southwest Festival in March this year, where there was the premiere. But we do know that some very key officials are appearing in the film. It was filmed in great secrecy. David Grush, by the way, doesn't appear in the film. I've spoken to David about this. But what's interesting about the film is that it certainly corroborates and more than confirms everything David Grush told us here on NewsNation in 2023 and in his testimony to the Congress. There is a trailer. It was released in mid-October. I might run a little bit of it here. It's a perler of a trailer, really gripping. It's an hour and 40 minutes and worth buying or renting. I strongly recommend it. Get your neighbours to watch it. Have a neighbourhood suburban party. Have a street party. Invite your skeptical neighbours along and get them to watch this film. So the key strength of the film, as it's been described by people who've seen it, is that it's got this 34 key insiders of sitting politicians, retired admiral, intelligence veterans. Some of those insiders are already well known to us. One of them, of course, most prominently is Lou Elizondo, the former head of the Pentagon's ATIP program, who investigated UFOs inside the Pentagon. And one key quote from Lou that I thought was a good place to kick off is his comment, quote, "It's ironic that the people who created the stigma to cover this up, labelling anybody who talked about it wacky and nuts, unintentionally ended up creating a new national security threat, which is the stigma itself." And he's quite right. I mean, Lou speaks, frankly, as somebody who's worked in a very senior role in counterintelligence. And I think he knows a lot more about the legacy program than his security constraints allow him to let on. And the fact that he's talking about how the stigma, the ridicule, the taboo attached to the UFO subject is actually now one of the biggest security threats is of grave concern. One of the most consistent messages that comes from people who appear in this film is the warning that we are asleep at the wheel, that we're not thinking about the implications of this technology and this knowledge of a non-human presence, and that we need to actively, publicly prepare for it. That is why there is a mandate for the current president, President Trump, and his administration to do the right thing and speak openly and honourably and restore honour to the people, the men and women who've been responsible for covering this up, I presume out of some misguided idea of heeding their national security oaths for the last 80 years. Let's go to the basic origins of this story. The Constitution of the United States requires that Congress be properly and fully informed about all expenditure in all government programs funded by the taxpayer. That's in Article 1 of the Constitution. That allegedly has not been happening with the UAP retrieval and reverse engineering program. The allegation is that there is a multi-billions, probably multi-trillions cost program that US taxpayers have been footing the bill for many, many decades that has been improperly, illegally, and perhaps criminally withheld from the knowledge of the American public. There are very, very grave allegations, including of murder, intimidation, bullying, threats, all manner of corrupt and improper behaviour that have allegedly been used by members of the intelligence, defence and private aerospace community to improperly suppress and keep this secret. There is an allegation still to be confirmed, perhaps one day it will be or won't be by the White House, whether there is some kind of an executive order that was put in place back in the days of the Eisenhower and Truman administration, perhaps a PED, a Presidential Emergency Action Directive, which has been kept secret, which allows this to be kept secret from Congress. But I would love the constitutionality of that to be assessed by the Supreme Court or some superior jurisprudence people in the United States legal system. I don't see how presidents can be kept in the dark. And that's the key issue of all of the people who appear in this film. They would no doubt regard themselves as patriots. They want the truth to be told. And this is their ambit position where they state very, very clearly that there is a cover-up, that it's gone on for far too long, and it's time for the public to be told the truth. Cue the White House disclosure by the end of the year, don't we all hope? So the next up, of course, is Chris Mellon, the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defence for Intelligence and Security, and a UAP advocate par excellence. Chris brings a certain panache and style to the UAP subject and has consistently written and spoken publicly about the need for more open disclosure and transparency. And in a featured clip with Hal Puthoff, he warns of existential risks from UAP NHI tech outpacing human control, alleging there are DoD programs that hoard crash debris. He claims that there are multiple crash retrievals confirmed by insiders and emphasises that there is a secret ongoing Cold War for supremacy with this UAP tech being waged between Russia, China and the US. Those are big words from a person who's been very close to the top of the US national security establishment, a man who no doubt has been read into many special access programs and other secret, compartmentalized secrets inside the US defense and intelligence community. Hal Puthoff also appears in the show. He's a quantum physicist, of course, and the former CIA DoD head of the remote viewing program, also involved as a scientist with ORSAP and ATIP. He talks about how the age of disclosure is brilliant because it goes quietly behind the scenes, talks to 34 people, and says, okay, if you all come out at the same time, you don't have the stigma associated with speaking out individually. And so you can make a great step forward. And I think that's a very astute comment from Hal. He's absolutely right. Some of the people that appear in this film probably would not have appeared on their own. Key point on Roswell, the 1947 alleged crash of a UAP, or perhaps two UAP craft in 1947, Hal Puthoff affirms there are key individuals who should know, who say the Roswell crash was real, and there were bodies. And he also discusses how there are reverse engineering failures that have led to Black Project dead ends. Now, this is one area of the message from Age of Disclosure that I'm a little bit skeptical about. Frankly, I'm not buying it. I do not accept that the US has not made significant advances with retrieved UAP technology. And I do suspect that the original 2014-2015 approach by Generals McCasland and Carey to Tom DeLonge through Lockheed Skunk Works and John Podesta in the White House at the time, that this was all part of an attempt to try and control the narrative, a kind of a limited hangout where they would disclose, yes, there are UAPs, yes, we have recovered technology, but we haven't been able to develop it that much, and don't you worry your tiny little heads, we're doing our level best, but we haven't been able to reverse engineer much of this technology at all. I'm afraid I'm not buying that, and if that's the message from Age of Disclosure, I am extremely skeptical about that message, and I know and I respect Hal Puthoff and Eric Davis and others who are pushing this line. I'm not sure I accept it, and they are patriots, they're good men, but they are, of course, constrained by their national security oath and by the intentions of the gatekeepers who control what knowledge is allowed to be released on the Legacy program. The other significant interviewee in this film, and I cannot overstate this, even though he gave his interview before he achieved the exalted positions he now sits in, it's incredibly significant that Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State and National Security Advisor acting in the Trump administration, appears in this film and says what he says. Marco Rubio breaks his silence to some degree on the classified briefings that he's no doubt received. And I can tell you, as National Security Advisor, he would have received briefings long after, of course, he did the interview for this film. And those briefings would no doubt have told him the full truth on the Legacy program. He called for declassification and states that leaders from both parties view the Age of Disclosure film as a stepping stone to bring the truth out. I guess at this point I should flag there is a rumour. There is a rumour doing the rounds, and I've heard it from multiple people now, not from the horse's mouth, not from the administration. Nobody in the administration has said this to me. But there is a rumour doing the rounds that once the Age of Disclosure film has aired, there may be movement from the White House. Now, I'm not holding my breath because even though Mr. Trump did make promises during the campaign to be more open and transparent with UAP videos and photographs and documents and to help us get to the truth of the UAP mystery, there has been a deafening silence from the administration on UAPs. Now, I am told by people very senior in the administration, I can put it like that there is a desire to get to the truth. And they've just been distracted by the Middle East, by Ukraine, by the economy, by the need to act on more urgent, pressing domestic matters, and that they are turning their head to the UAP issue. I guess I've got a one-track mind. I don't understand why any incoming president, faced with the probability of being briefed about the biggest secret in human history, wouldn't immediately scurry to the White House press room podium and say, "Ladies and gentlemen, I must apologise. We have been lying to you for the last 80 years. We did not tell you the truth. I, President Trump, as your new president, will tell you the full truth because I believe in transparency, openness and accountability. And I am going to expose the deep state once and for all, definitively, for the people that they are, because they have lied to you." Who knows? That day may one day come. I'm not holding my breath. But it is significant that Marco Rubio called in his pre-administration interview for UAP declassification and transparency. So let's hope that the acting National Security Advisor has exercised sway inside Cabinet and persuaded Donald Trump to show leadership and resolve on the UAP issue. Another person who speaks in the film is Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, and she focuses on the national security implications, the possibility that foreign adversaries might secure some kind of an advantage over us in securing access to this tech. And this is a consistent theme in the film, that basically, if it is true that there is non-human intelligence technology in the possession of the US and other nations, we damn well better be the best country at reverse engineering it. I've said publicly on Reality Check before that my understanding is that the Chinese have stolen the march on both Russia and America, that America has made advances in anti-gravitics and energy systems, but that the Chinese are way ahead. And this is the concern, that the over-secrecy, the stigmatization that's been attached to this subject for decades has actually hindered our ability to be properly scientific in achieving the results that we want to achieve. Hopefully, we'll get to the truth soon. Tim Burchett also appears in this film, and he cheerily asserts that this film is the smoking gun we've waited for. 34 insiders can't all be wrong. And he's concerned, Tim is, about the threats to whistleblowers and alleges the DoD flipped the script on UAP hearings to minimise disclosure. And I agree with Tim. I think what's happened in Congress is a disgrace. Congress has been nobbled. Tim hasn't been nobbled, God bless him. He's still sticking his head up, as are Nancy Mace, Anna Paulina Luna, Eric Burleson and other prominent commentators on the need for UAP transparency and oversight in Congress, but they are fairly junior representatives, and sadly the people in control of the committees and the key opinion leaders in the Congress have so clearly allowed themselves to become supine supplicants to the gatekeepers and the national security state. The people who should be rattling the cage and demanding to know why the Constitution's constraints on oversight have not been heeded by the gatekeepers have rolled over and let the generals and the intelligence chiefs tickle their tummy. So this is why we need leadership from the White House. And here is President Trump's opportunity to definitively prove his claims of the deep state and to come out with the evidence that we all know he has of what's really going on with the UAP mystery. Another person appearing in this film is a former Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper. I'm not fully apprised of what he knows, but James Clapper, of course, is a controversial figure because he has previously admitted that he perhaps inadvertently, how does one do that, misled the Senate about the extent of government surveillance. And maybe this is his mea culpa. Maybe this is the former DNI coming in ready to tell the full truth about UAPs. He has made the comment that the UFO files were buried deeper than nukes, which I think is quite a telling comment. It's interesting also to know that the DNI Tulsi Gabbard has also avowed her desire to have transparency on UAPs. So the woman who is currently the Director of National Intelligence in the Trump administration has been very outspoken about the need for disclosure. Tim Gallaudet also appears in this film. He's the former Rear Admiral, retired Rear Admiral, a genuinely lovely human being and a good friend of this program, who was the head of NOAA and who has been very outspoken about the mystery of unidentified submerged objects and the possibility of there being even alien bases underwater. He's spoken very enthusiastically about his participation in this film, and he has testified on ocean-based UAP recoveries, and again the same concern about this global competition for this UAP technology. There are apparently 20 plus military insiders and intelligence insiders who also appear in this film. And there are claims of how there are 5 confirmed UAP crashes, including the 1947 Roswell crash and the 1996 Varginha, Brazil crash, which we've talked about very recently on Reality Check with filmmaker James Fox. Talks also about the retrieval of non-human biologics, recovered alien bodies. Believe this if you will. I am so looking forward to the day if and when government admits all of this is true, and these smug smiles will be wiped off the faces of those skeptics and debunkers who have for so long resorted to ridicule and stigma and taboo rather than responding logically and objectively on the subject of UAPs. It's going to be very interesting to see if the White House does come out and make a public statement in future months or years, how that group of determined debunkers are going to behave. I hope they all crawl back to their holes and never stick their heads out in public ever again, because they will deserve vilification and opprobrium. And I think also we should be asking, if there are people who have improperly, illegally, criminally withheld this knowledge from the public knowledge, why are they not going to be tried for treason? It's going to be a very interesting decision if the White House does decide to be open on this issue. What will it do? Will it do what I strongly, sadly suspect they should do, which is offer a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where, just like South Africa did after apartheid, Nelson Mandela, in an act of extraordinary magnanimity, decided to offer amnesty to anyone who'd been involved in crimes against the state in return for their truthful depositions about what they knew. And it was a very healing process. I got to witness it as a journalist. And even though I hate the idea of people getting off scot-free for their crimes, if crimes have been committed, and I know they have been, I actually suspect it's going to be a necessary part of the healing process for the American people and the American government in coming to terms with the magnitude of this cover-up. What do we know about the film? We know that it's following the historical cover-up from the 1940s through to the present day. We know that it gets into the Grush hearings and the way that stigma, ridicule, and to have been used to try and control the public narrative. I think it's going to openly discuss the fact that there's been a control group. It's going to talk very strongly about the arms race between the Russians, the Chinese, and the Americans for access to and control of this technology and its knowledge. And the key point that comes out of the Age of Disclosure is a call to action, a bipartisan call, where people from both sides of the House, defence and intelligence insiders, urge disclosure, warning that secrecy has an expiration date. Now, there's no physical evidence of craft shown. It's testimony driven, with dramatic reenactments and archival clips. But what's good about the Age of Disclosure, I'm told, is that it is an objective, solid retelling of a story many of us know well, but which probably 99% of the viewing public have absolutely no idea about. And that's what this film is targeted at. The UAP commentariat community, of course, has come back slugging it, basically saying it's not really going to tell us anything new. But I'm tending to agree with people like Jay Stratton, who calls it the most credible landmark contribution to disclosure. I'm hoping that it makes a big hit in public consciousness, and most importantly, I'm hoping it wakes up people in the current Trump administration to do the right thing and push for transparency and disclosure. The commentary that came out of the South by Southwest Festival airing was strong. People said they were stunned, they were shocked that it was a highly credible film. It got pretty positive reviews, but on Rotten Tomatoes, it's not doing too well. I think it's getting 6s or 7s on Rotten Tomatoes. But there is, of course, a pushback from the intelligence community, and I think we need to put it on record that it is so flaming obvious that the intelligence and defence community are clinging on with their fingernails, running as much disinformation psyops as they can, putting down shit as quickly and as early as possible for the film to try and cause as much mischief as possible. Guys, it's not going to work. The public are going to be interested in the revelations that this film makes, and if the kind of response that I'm getting on the street is any guide, people are waking up. There's a wisdom of the crowd here. This film will play a key role in waking the public up. People are suddenly going to start talking, I think, about the UAP subject in a credible and informed way. They're not going to immediately default to ridicule and contempt. Lou Elizondo has a few quotes that I think are worth reminding people here, that this is talking about a cover-up, the most successful disinformation campaign in the history of the US government, representing 80 years of lies and deception. As Lou says, we discovered there actually was another deeply hidden and much larger UAP program. One of the key arguments behind this film, Age of Disclosure, is whether the UAP mystery is a threat or not. And this film allegedly pushes very much the threat narrative, and that's copted a bit of a flaying from some in UAP circles who suggest that the UAPs, the NHI, are nothing but benevolent, cuddly aliens that want to wish us well. And I don't think it's being entirely fair. I've always thought that when people like Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon talk about threats, they're talking with the perspective of people who are schooled in national security and counterintelligence. And in that world, anything that is conducting intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance on us, and we don't know anything about it, is by definition a threat. We're not saying it's coming to kill us, that it's going to war against us, or that it has malign intentions, but frankly, until we know more about it, we should treat it as a potential threat. And I've never really taken any more from Lou Elizondo's comments than that. But on UFO Twitter and social media commentary, there's been a bit of a backlash that essentially suggests that this film is pushing a narrative, a CIA, big-budget, false UFO threat narrative. And I'm sorry, I'm not buying into wacky conspiracy theories like that. I do think that the public should be skeptical about the idea that there is a threat necessarily, that these are aliens coming to get us, but I don't think we should discount that possibility. The bottom line is, as we know from Slide 9, which is a document that was presented to an Undersecretary of Defence which talked about the capacities and capabilities of the NHI, we know that the NHI have the capacity to manipulate human cognition, to actually tap into human consciousness, to physically alter what we see, to manipulate our perception. Anything like that, frankly, is a threat in my book. And frankly, I don't care whether it's a dark conspiracy or not. We should be treating it with caution. And I can respect and understand why the national security establishment might be cautious. Where I am skeptical is the extent to which they try to play down the extent to which the United States has been able to reverse engineer this technology. Apparently, we're going to be told that that program has largely been unsuccessful. I'm not buying it. There are many, many interesting quotes from people in the film, but I think it's probably best that I let you watch The Age of Disclosure and make your own judgment. And what we'll probably do is have a future reality check where we can have an open discussion, where I can hear from the audience what they thought of it. And more importantly, let's see what the White House says in response, because frankly, After the film airs on the 21st of November, it will be airing in Washington. Maybe they can secure President Trump a special seat in whatever cinema it will be, or maybe they can have an airing at the White House. It's going to be an absolutely key tipping point decision how the president, how the National Security Advisor, Marco Rubio, how the DNI, Tulsi Gabbard, and how Kash Patel at the FBI, John Ratcliffe at the CIA, how they all choose to respond to the allegations made in this film by key opinion leaders from the defence, intelligence and political community. This is not some idle UFO documentary made by a bunch of amateurs. This is a serious Hollywood film. It's making very, very serious allegations, and I think they deserve to be listened to. So let's talk about Age of Disclosure after you've all seen it, and I hope you enjoy the viewing. Thank you for watching. Hello and welcome back to Reality Check. I'm Ross Coulthart, and you might recall there's a rich history in America of programs that investigate the mysteries and the unexplained that intrigue all of us. As a kid, I grew up with Leonard Nimoy's In Search Of, and if I be honest with you, I can even go back to memories of Robert Stack in, I think it was Unsolved Mysteries. And these cases do intrigue us, but frankly, I'll be honest with you, over the years as a kid, I found them all a little hammy. I found them laboured and sometimes oversimplifying. So it's quite refreshing to see a new series on Netflix called Files of the Unexplained. It's an intriguing new 8-part docu-series that delves into a lot of intriguing mysteries across the US and North America. What I especially love about it, and we'll all confess here to a passing interest in UFOs on Reality Check, is it actually tackles the subject, the vexing, taboo, stigmatized subject of UFOs. And the executive producer of that series, Skye Borgman, joins us now. Welcome to Reality Check, Skye. Why on earth is somebody with your undoubted, unblemished reputation as a film director and cinematographer getting into this vexing, stigmatized issue of UFOs? You know you're treading into dangerous waters and falling down a rabbit hole that will get you excoriated by the critics.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably why I wanted to do this series, because I am eternally interested in things that I don't know anything about. And that's something, I mean, this series provides such a canvas really of exploring all kinds of different stories that are unexplained, whether it's ghost stories or UFO stories or missing person stories or strange things coming out of the sky stories. Pretty much we can tackle anything. And what we really wanted to do in this, and I think you sort of touched on it briefly in your introduction, is that we wanted to take a very human perspective in this series. And we wanted to talk to the people who had actually experienced it or their families had actually experienced it and find out what a toll it takes on them. And it's something I deal with a lot in the stories that I tell, is the trauma that people feel from not being believed. And that is something that across this series, every single episode has that in common, that all these people feel traumatized because they're disbelieved, made fun of, unlistened to, and generally sort of mocked. And I wanted to have the world sort of hear what these people feel like when we sort of unabashedly come at them.
Can I say the thing that really leapt out at me with your series, and it distinguishes the show from pretty much anything else I've seen on US TV in this vein, is the beautiful cinematography. You've had some fabulous camera operators working on this, cinematographers working on this. It's your cinematography background, I suspect, but boy, there's some gorgeous shots.
Well, thank you. I think it is probably my cinematography background that definitely came into play and say we want to go to beautiful places. We want to tell stories of beautiful people. We want to tell stories of conflicted people, and we want them to be in settings that people can really sort of aspire to go and travel to, and have it be a very human sort of connection to these places. These stories happen everywhere. They happen in neighborhoods. They happen in mountains. They happen on lakes. They happen in cities, in towns, in the middle of nowhere. And so really sort of going places that are beautiful, filming them in a beautiful way. I, I feel like that kind of opens up an accessibility door to all of these stories.
Why do you think we are all intrigued by mystery?
I mean, we're always intrigued by what we don't know. If we know the answer to everything, we're not interested in it anymore. And I think for the most part, people are curious beings and we want to know what we don't know. And that's why I think the series tackling these different elements of UFOs, hauntings, all of these different elements, I think that's what the hold power is. Of course, some people are going to be a little bit more drawn to stories of hauntings, and other people are going to be drawn a little bit more to stories of UFOs. But we're all drawn to those stories of what we don't know. And if we can get a glimmer of explanation or a glimmer of just knowing that other people are kind of in the same boat that we are, I think it's very appealing.
Well, we have a definite UFO bias on this show, Sky, so we're not shy about talking to you about Pascagoula, which is one of the cases you investigate. In fact, you start the show series off with that story. I've long been fascinated with Pascagoula, and I have to admit, you scooped me because I wasn't aware that Calvin Parker was still alive, and sadly he passed away in September of 2023. But he was one of the two witnesses, Parker and Hickson, who had this extraordinary encounter in Pascagoula, Mississippi, in, I think it was 1973, in an incident where two men claim they were literally abducted from their fishing boat by aliens with pincer claws. You had an opportunity to, I guess, investigate this case. I assume you're somebody skeptical who comes into these things in the layered way that you do, with the sort of the nuance of investigation. What conclusion did you come away with from that encounter? Because one of the criticisms that I want to put to you about your show and a lot of these kinds of shows is they never reach a conclusion, that you present evidence and then you let the viewer be the judge. There's never a moment where you say, well, we think this was aliens, or we think this was. I laughed, actually. There was one person on Reddit who suggested that the Calvin Parker Hickson story was really a gay encounter, and that they were concealing the fact with this elaborate explanation that they were having an assignation in the darkness. Some people can't be convinced, but tell me, what conclusion did you come to about the Pascagoula 73 alien incident?
It absolutely happened. And I think it was an incredibly devastating experience for both of these men. But I feel like their stories really tracked. I never felt like they went sort of off base or that their stories changed. And what really, honestly, what really cemented it to me was the audio recording that happened once, they were left alone. And we talk about it in the episode. They don't start talking about, hey, what's your story? Let's get this straight. Let's get that straight. They really were just flummoxed by what had happened, and they were asking each other about it. And that to me was probably the singular piece of evidence that really convinced me that it actually did happen. But what I also find very interesting is I believe, even if it didn't happen, that these two men believe that it did. And that to me is enough to believe in the experience actually happening. But I'm one of those that believes it did happen.
So you think it's possible we are being visited by non-human intelligence?
I do. I think it's a little bit of an egocentric place to be if we believe we're the only ones in this universe, the only ones on this planet. I think that there are other entities out there. I don't know what they look like. I don't know if they're the little green men. I think there's something to be said about a consistency of what these images have been for aliens, that they look something like that. I don't know if those are the only aliens, but I absolutely believe that we're not alone in this universe.
One of the other stories you tell, and again, this is one of my favourites, is the Devil's Den incident. Terry Lovelace, who went on to become a district attorney, a deputy district attorney. So he's a person of some repute. He's not given to making inflated or over-exaggerated claims, and a lot of people who've tried to test his story have not found it wanting. And Terry was on a camping trip in the 70s with a friend of his. He was working for the United States Air Force at the time, so he was an enlisted man. And he says he and his colleague, Toby, were both abducted. And he found that the intriguing part, I hadn't seen these x-rays, the intriguing part in the story that you tell is they actually find an x-ray that shows some kind of implant in his leg.
Yeah, and what's really interesting about that too is the effort that Terry had to put into actually getting an x-ray of his leg. He wasn't able to get it from his military doctors. It was really a chiropractor that he went to go visit after, who would take x-rays for him, that he was able to find this implant. And he questioned it. There was no scar on his leg. It got there. Who knows how it got there? He doesn't know how it got there. And he questioned it. He knew that something was up, but he didn't know what. And then as he finds this implant, it takes him back to this experience he had in the military so many years prior, and with other instances in his life where he felt that he was visited by aliens, whether it was sort of in a subconscious level or a conscious level. And then, as strangely as the implant appeared in his leg, it disappears again. And so he feels like somebody came back and took the implant out of his leg.
But the thing I didn't know about until I saw it on your show was that there were actually photographs of what he says were contusions that appeared after the implant immediately disappeared from his leg. So he's meant to be going in, I think, for another examination. And shortly before that examination, there's literally a wound that appears on his leg. He feels pain. He can't explain where that pain has come from. And when he looks, he sees some kind of contusion, some kind of an abrasion, which suggests that something had happened, which he can't explain.
What's also interesting too with those pictures is they appear completely differently than what I would expect a wound would look like, of cutting somebody open and reaching in and bringing out an implant. It's sort of a round bruise. And so it looks really different than anything I would think of, like removing something from somebody's body. So there's a lot of what Terry has to say that is intriguing and mystifying.
Did you go out on the road at all with any of these shoots, or were you the executive that had to put this all together back in the studio?
Both. I was out in the field on 4. There's another executive producer, Avril Z Speaks, and she was out in the field on the other 4. And then we were sort of leapfrogging each other. So, going out in the field and then coming back and starting post. And then we were both pretty equally involved in the post process on all 8 episodes.
I'm really intrigued in your personal story because for me, I have to admit, I started out investigating the UFO issue with a huge degree of skepticism, thinking I'm going to disprove all of this, debunk it, and show that it's all some US black program. And it was very funny because when I finally brought the rushes back to the studio here in Australia and we started cutting them, my executive producer was looking across at me saying, "Hell's bells, Roscoe." And it was funny to watch because I'd already decided on the road there was something to this phenomenon and I couldn't deny it. I was being confronted with incontrovertible evidence from first-hand witnesses telling me things that they'd seen. And it was funny to watch the editor. I always love watching the impact of this kind of testimony on individuals who've had no exposure to the witnesses before. And there is something, it comes through, there's a verisimilitude in what you've been able to do with your stories as well. You hear the witnesses themselves. You hear Parker. You hear Terry Lovelace and John Burroughs. I'll get to John Burroughs in a moment. And back in the studio, people who were hardened skeptics and cynics turn. Did that happen to you?
It definitely happened in the studio, but it really happened out in the field, or that's where I felt it the most, because we had, I would say, probably more skeptics in the field and hard skeptics in the field on our team than we did back at home in the editing bays. I think everybody in the editing bay was open to possibilities of things. But in the field, when certain things would happen, we had a couple of skeptics who were just like, nope, 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 it's the wind that did that, or I don't believe this person. And usually what they went to, and this is a really interesting story, is they'd say, well, are there any photos? Is there any video? Why did the camera turn itself off right before it was supposed to record this vision? Or why did this photo of somebody took of an alien not turn out? Or why did it get ruined when it was at the developer? And then in one of the episodes, we were at a beach, and we were all standing around talking, and there were 5 cameras on the beach with us. And I looked out, and it was the Sailor Sea episode. I looked out and I saw something in the water. It was a hump and then another hump. And the producer was with me on it. And I said, did you just see that? And she goes, yeah. And I said, it didn't look like a porpoise, did it? And she said, no. And I looked around, 5 cameras, all of them in the sand on the beach, not one of them rolling. So I kind of said, we're in exactly the same thing that we're all talking about, that we're sort of accusing other people of not getting a picture of.
It's always the way. So when you went to Netflix with this series, what was their response? Are they embracing this kind of content? Are they showing an interest in doing this kind of investigation into factual nonfiction series?
They definitely are. I mean, I think that Netflix is always open to doing something that's a little bit different. They know that because they've got the new version of Unsolved Mysteries, and they know that that performs well. And sometimes the series or the episodes really of Unsolved Mysteries that have a little bit more of the supernatural element, they see an uptick in people watching this. So they know it's something that people want. They know it's something that people crave, and they haven't produced all that many series like this. There are whole networks in America dedicated to shows like this and to series like this, but Netflix hasn't quite gone there yet. And so I think they're really interested in seeing if a series like this really brings the people in, and if it's something that people respond to. And it seems like they are, honestly. I mean, we kind of shot up to the #1 position, at least here in America. I feel like we did in Canada as well. I don't know how we did in Australia, but it seems like absolutely it's a show that really resonates with the audience.
No, it's funny. You've done very well in Australia, and I was aware that you hit #1 during April. I think you were pipped in the 3rd week by the 3-Body Problem, which I freely admit I got addicted to, that wonderful science fiction series based on the trilogy of books. But it's commendable, frankly, that you're running. How long are the duration of the shows? 40 minutes, 45 minutes?
They're shorter. They range between 30 and the longest one is 45 minutes, but we're really aiming to be in around the 30, 35-minute mark.
Because one of the problems in Australia, I've worked in public affairs TV, investigative journalism, 60-minute style shows for probably 30 or 40 years. I'm showing my age. And the thing that I have had a constant battle with is executives in network television who tell me the public are stupid. And they say people don't want to hear too many details. Really, what they want is something that's quick sound bites. I think the Big Chill movie, the Jeff Goldblum character described every story as having to be the length of the average crap. It's the requirement that basically you don't treat the audience as being somebody who's intelligent and capable of analysing facts. You basically insult their intelligence and basically give them a dumbed down version of the information. What I found commendable about what you've been doing in your series is you let people talk.
Yeah, it was important to us. This first and foremost is a series about the people who have experienced whatever they've experienced. It's not about the experience itself. It's really about the people and what they've gone through and experiencing that. And I have to say, working with Netflix on it was really nice because they kept asking for more details. I want to know more. And it was such a refreshing thing to have them say, it's okay. And we don't care how long the episodes are. We want them to be as long as they need to be. You don't have to fit into a 30-minute time slot. Just let them be what they need to be. And it was nice because I feel like all of the stories really are exactly the length that they need to be.
You've actually made your reputation in the instance of with the story called, I think, Abducted in Plain Sight, the harrowing story of the abduction of a little girl called Jan Broberg. And I actually looked at the case at one stage for Australia's 60 Minutes. And I saw your doco, and what I loved about it was you didn't hammer us over the head with your personal views. You basically let the evidence layer itself, and what I found breathtaking. I think one of the descriptions about your series has been that what did somebody say about it? Was been called the craziest documentary ever, and I think it's because people were so confronted by the fact that a little girl could be abducted like that, and what I loved about your show was that you did this layering of the evidence, which basically allowed people to understand how this actually happened. And I think you do the same thing in this series on Netflix, don't you?
I do, and it's important to me to do that. It's part of my approach to stories like this. I like looking at the different layers because I feel like as an audience, we're drawn into things because we want to have a deeper understanding. It's certainly what draws me to all of the stories I do, but to not put as much as I can, right? To not put my ideas out there, but to just look at what happened, to show the audience what happened, and to walk away after the credits roll, after they're done watching the show, and for a conversation to continue, to have, say, two people watching it and they walk away and one person feels one way about it and another person feels a completely different way about it. And if that conversation can keep happening and a discourse can keep happening about how something like this played out, that's a success in my mind, is to create a conversation and have that conversation keep going.
One of the stories you get into, and I wanted to get your response to this, is the ghosts of Myrtle's plantation. And I noticed a few people on Reddit, in fact, quite a few people on Reddit. I had to look this term up. I didn't know what the acronym meant, but they were using the acronym SJW. And essentially what they were having a go at you about was being, quote, a social justice warrior for inputting into the films that you're making for Netflix, ideas that I think a lot of the viewers found confronting. One of the things I admired, frankly, about the ghosts of Myrtle's plantation is, you talked about the appalling plantation homestead labor, the slavery that took place on the Myrtle's plantation. Some people didn't like being told that. It's an issue, isn't it, that you have to have a balance in a story like this, that you're not being seen as hectoring or lecturing. But frankly, it was a good idea, wasn't it, to put this into that context?
Well, it was important to us. I have to say that. And I can see how it can be off-putting to some people, but for us, we took the idea that what everybody talks about is that this place is haunted. And plantations are something that are very common in this part of the United States. And we understood that these haunted plantations are something people talk about. The slavery at the plantations isn't necessarily something that people talk about, or how we got to this point, or this appropriation of this young woman who historical books found that she doesn't exist. Now, somebody like her does exist, and there is somebody who may be haunting that place whose name is not Chloe. It's possible, but I do feel like having some kind of I don't know, reality that absolutely nobody can say that didn't happen is something that's important, and a reminder of what we're up against. And really to look at ourselves and go, okay, I go to Myrtle's plantation. What do I come away talking about? Do I come away talking about its haunted factors, or do I come away talking about the slavery? And most people go there to experience some haunting. And so I did think it was important with that one, and with all of our stories, we really take some kind of issue, if you will, and we try to bring it to the forefront.
Now, I have a confession to make, Sky. That there's a person you had on your Myrtle's plantation story who's a member of an organisation in Australia called Skeptics, the Skeptics. I think her name was Karen Stolznaus. Forgive me if I've pronounced it incorrectly. But oddly enough, I actually loved her contribution to the Myrtle's plantation story, because what you were doing was you were saying, look, here are these people who are saying they're seeing ghosts. And then you did balance it by bringing in Karen, who's now living in America. I think she's worked in linguistics in a North American university. And she's come from Australia, where she was a renowned skeptic. The Skeptics, by the way, gave me a what's called the Bent Fork Award in Australia for doing UFO stories. They accused me of being too credulous by giving the subject of UFOs, UAPs, any coverage at all. So frankly, I think you can expect to receive the Bent Fork very soon. But congratulations on using Karen, because I thought she provided a useful counterbalance in the Myrtles Plantation story. She was putting the view that these are myths and legends. People tell stories to try and understand things. She was giving the classic skeptics, if you like, debunker line to try and explain what people were seeing there.
It's important to have the skeptic's view, I think. In all of the episodes, we really tried to bring somebody in that has a more skeptic view, a more scientific view, somebody who could give us an alternate version of what other people may think was a UFO, an alien encounter, a ghost, whatever the subject is. Having that skeptic there, or having one character who could provide both sides, was interesting to us. To hear that they are completely scientifically driven, but they can't deny this one experience and they can't explain that experience. And I think that's something that we all have in common. I know I've certainly had experiences that I can try to explain away, and maybe I can come up with an explanation, but maybe I can't. And I think everybody has been there before. And so having that skeptic be the voice of, I don't know, half the audience, more than half the audience, less than half the audience, I think it allows another entrance point into knowing that these stories may or may not be real to everyone.
I was talking to a scientist the other day, and he said to me when we were talking about witness evidence, especially in the context of UFOs, UAPs, he said, Ross, stories are not science. And it's interesting, though, because one of the criticisms of shows like this is that we're often giving an airing to credulous ideas, things that people find confronting, ideas of ghosts, of the paranormal, of supernatural ideas. Do you think there's a problem with science in that there appears to be a reality that people are experiencing, whether that's a tangible, real reality? There is something that humans encounter that they use to describe their world, and it comes out in descriptions of the paranormal, of supernatural, of UFOs. We don't appear to have a language or maybe an investigation system that can deal with this, because science essentially says, where's the evidence? And as you and I both know, the cameras are never pointing in the right direction.
I think it's part of our human nature to look for the evidence, but it's also part of our human nature to believe and to know and trust our gut, and to understand that something that we may have experienced may not be explainable by science. I mean, science is continuing to evolve as well. It's not just like science exists and there's nowhere else to go. We're constantly learning scientific things. We're constantly exploring new worlds. We're constantly going farther with what we have and what we accept as being reality or scientific or the truth. And so I think there's a lot to be said about things that aren't scientific. I'm sure there are scientists out there who believe in things that they've never seen before. Look, I've never been to Australia. I believe it exists, though. And so, I mean, what's to say I've never been abducted by an alien? I can still believe I could be, or that aliens exist, or that spacecraft exist. And so just because we haven't seen something, whether it's of this earth or of a different earth or of a different time and space continuum, I don't necessarily think that seeing it explains it.
So you've had the opportunity to look into the eyes of witnesses on the road in this series, first-hand witnesses to events that are often described as being paranormal, supernatural, off this world, UFOs, the suggestion of some kind of encounter with non-human intelligence. In the encounters that you had, where you actually met some of these people, what are the most memorable ones you've had where it did give you cause for pause?
I think probably John Burroughs was one of the more interesting people.
I'm so pleased you said that.
Because
pleased you said that.
He was incredible. I mean, because he had actual physical maladies that he still suffers from that are unexplainable, and an actual earthly military combative relationship in trying to find his medical records. And both of those things exist to him. He believes in this, absolutely. He's somebody who has fought for our country. He's somebody that really is the kind of person, and his experience is the kind of experience that lives in both of these worlds in a very, very, very messed up sort of earthly world of not being able to get your medical records and having an experience that actually changed him physically.
So I'm just going to explain to our audience. I've spent a lot of time, Skye, investigating the Rendlesham RAF Bentwaters 1980 UFO landing alleged incident. And just to explain to the audience, John Burroughs was one of two US Air Force military servicemen who were told to go to the adjacent Rendlesham Forest, right next to a very, very important US military base that did have nuclear weapons within it. It was a forward base for the US Air Force in the event of conflict with the Soviet Union. This was where the Russians would be faced with missiles, nuclear missiles that were put on planes from the Americans. So a very, very sensitive American base. High security. The people trusted with the security of these bases have absolutely impeccable reputation, all handpicked for this very important job. And John was basically told, after there was a report of a craft or some kind landing in the forest, to go out and investigate. And he was in the company of a guy called Peniston, who makes more elaborate claims about what he saw that I'm a little bit skeptical about. But John gives, I think, a highly credible account of what he genuinely believes was some kind of encounter with a non-human intelligence. And it's interesting, I'll explain. I got into that story because I was covering the campaign trail with John McCain, the senator. And before John McCain died, he actually gave me a nudge. It was one of the reasons I got into this subject. He gave me a nudge to check out the John Burroughs story because he'd been instrumental. And I'm glad you told this story. He'd been instrumental in pushing to get John Burroughs' medical records released because the US Air Force, as it is wont to do, was trying to hide the medical records that were stopping John from getting the care and the medical service that he needed. It's an amazing story. Do you believe him?
I absolutely believe him. And his medical records are still sealed. I mean, like I kind of go, if that unseal the medical records, if you could have seen them, if you could show me something that would make me think differently, fine. But his medical records are still sealed. He can get his medical care if he goes to doctors, military doctors, or sanctioned doctors, but he will never get his medical records. And so that you really have to question why that is the case. And so I absolutely believe John Burroughs.
Now, I want to come back to you, though, because the one area where I found myself being skeptical, and maybe it was the way you told the story, was, is it Lanier Lake, the lake near Atlanta, Georgia, which is this gigantic artificial lake where there's been an astonishing spate of drownings and deaths, mysterious deaths. That was the one episode, and I guess it's good because you got me engaged. I watched it all the way through, but it was the one episode where, frankly, I was going, this is bull. I really don't believe this. Clearly this is a bunch of Atlantans going away on a long weekend. They're getting drunk. They're falling off the boats. There's a higher proportion of people getting absolutely stonkered out on a lake, and no surprise, a lot of people drown. Why was it a mystery?
Because just as many people who are getting drunk and going out there and having fun and falling off their boats and drowning or being impaled have a ghost story to tell, have stories to tell about somebody reaching up and grabbing their leg, or feeling a presence of someone, or experiencing or seeing the lady in blue. So many people have experiences of something paranormal happening to them who weren't drunk, who weren't on the lake sort of whooping it up with their friends, who were just there at the waterside and they experience something, or in the water and somebody grabs their leg. So it absolutely is something that people experience, is a paranormal thing. Where it comes from, I don't know. I do know that there was a city that this Lake Lanier covered an entire city, and we were out in the boat and they had radar that was looking down and you could see the buildings that sort of exist at the bottom of the lake. And this whole town was essentially demolished filled in with water, and a lake was created for recreation. That alone, you kind of go, it's got to be somebody, some sort of souls lurking around there wanting to kind of make sure that people aren't walking away from this and forgetting about them.
You know, it's funny. One thing I admired in the story, and oddly enough, this will upset the people who call you a social justice warrior. I actually didn't know the history of the forced relocation of the Native American tribes from that area into far-flung corners of, I think, Tennessee, your story reported. And I noticed on Reddit, there were a lot of people criticizing you for telling that story, people groaning, going, oh, I don't want to know the story of the, social justice warriors yet again lecturing me. I liked that. And it's interesting because you've got to come to Australia with your series, because we have very similar issues in Australia where we've treated the Aboriginal people appallingly. And as a result, there are these untold stories of massacres, of, again, forced relocations, of appalling treatment of Indigenous people. And they do, I think, evoke a lot of supernatural and paranormal stories, because we have very similar stories here of weird happenings that are never fully explained, that do go back to our Indigenous peoples having been treated appallingly.
Yeah, I also believe that our Indigenous people have a greater, sort of more direct link to the spirit world, I think, than sort of than I do. And so it's interesting to me that they can be the ones that sort of come back. And so it's a really interesting experience to be with Indigenous people from whatever land, because they teach me something every time I talk to them. And it's really such an honor to sort of be able to tell their stories, at least a small fraction. And that's what's interesting too about the social justice warrior comments, because most of our story is about the supernatural element to it. And we give a little bit of a sliver of this social justice element. And so I know that it can sort of bristle people's feathers, but I'm fine with that. I'm absolutely fine with bristling some feathers, and I'm fine with bringing these stories to the forefront for 5 to 10 minutes, if that, of an entire episode.
Is Netflix going to give you a new series? Are you going to be able to travel? I mean, I guess I'm worried for you that North America doesn't have enough good mysteries. You've got to come down here to Australia and start delving into the wonderful mysteries we have here down under. And do you think an American audience would be interested?
Absolutely, an American audience would be interested. It's funny because when I was doing the initial research, I had a story in Australia of the Trump family, not the Trump family, the Trump family, and a mysterious disappearance that they went through. And it was one of the ones that I really loved. Unfortunately for our season 1, we were sort of told that we needed to stay within the confines of America, not really go much further than this. But hopefully for season 2, we could travel to Australia. There's some stories in Mexico. There are European stories. And I think sort of being able to go beyond the borders of America really will produce some stories that are really, really interesting.
Well, Sky, I, for one, am very happy that you're going to have a second series of Netflix, and that we might even get you here down under, because there are intriguing mysteries that I think Files of the Unexplained can very much delve into. Thank you so much for joining Reality Check. I really enjoyed this conversation, and good luck in the future.
Thank you so much.
So before we go this week, a few more of our viewers' questions to be answered. Here's one from Rick D'Souza. Jean-Claude Juncker, President of the European Commission, also mentioned in statements about beings who watch us from afar. Oh, did he? The establishment knows a lot. Question is, why do they feel the average human should not learn of this? I wasn't aware that the President of the European Union had said that. I'm speaking to some members of the EU Parliament at the moment who are talking about their awareness of UAP issues and making it a political issue. I have to get in touch with Mr. Juncker. But why do they feel the average human should not learn of this? Okay, there's an assumption there that they do feel that. I don't think Juncker is expressing that view. I'd find it very unlikely if the European Union Parliament had been brought into the loop on the NHI secret. But certainly I think there are people in the US government who take the view, and I suspect also the British-Canadian governments, probably not the Australian government, my government, who are aware of this issue. Why do they do it? Look, it's anyone's guess, frankly. I suspect the primary reason is to conceal the potential weaponry and technological developments from foreign adversaries that could be gained from knowledge of non-human technology. There's also, I think, somewhat patronising view that if you reveal to people that there is a non-human intelligence, we're all suddenly going to panic like chooks with their heads cut off because we're frightened of the consequences and the implications. I think that's incredibly patronising. Frankly, talking to my kids and to lots of other young people, I think people are ready and in fact mentally very well prepared for the likelihood of non-human intelligence. They're a bit impatient and frankly disdainful of patronising and condescending political leaders who think the public have no right to know. Patrick, the German dude. Ross, those good people at Arrow you spoke about, that's the Pentagon's UFO investigation office, those people at Arrow you spoke about on the Good Trouble show, wouldn't it be possible that those people become whistleblowers themselves? Can't they file formal complaints? In what way could they contribute, shining a light on Arrow's shenanigans? What levels of security clearance do they hold? It seems like they are in a position to do more than to just be frustrated. I agree with you. Watch that space. There are good people in Arrow. I said this recently on Matt Ford's Good Trouble show in the wake of quite shocking revelations from Lou Elizondo that he felt threatened that his life might indeed be in danger from some people who don't want this story told. I know that sounds dramatic, and I know a lot of people will be disdainful of such assertions, but I can tell you there's a hell of a lot of threats and intimidation and worse going on behind the scenes. More on that soon. Can they become whistleblowers? Yes, they can. And how do you know they haven't? There are people speaking to people like myself all the time. The Pentagon, the intelligence community, frankly, is leaking like a sieve. And yes, there are good people who are coming forward to the Congress, the Senate Select Committee for Intelligence, the Senate Armed Services Committee. And hopefully we may, if we're lucky this year, get some kind of public hearing from the House, perhaps the House Oversight Committee, and maybe those people could be called to give evidence there. I would certainly like to see the current director of Arrow, Tim Phillips, questioned about whether he's happy with, frankly, the appalling report that was written by Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, the Arrow Historical Review, and the equally ridiculous Eglin Air Force Base case resolution. What a pompous title. It was not a resolution, I can tell you that. Anyway, they can come forward, and maybe they might. AMZilla 642, questions for Ross. Any chance to interview Haim Eshed? Oh boy, Dr. Haim Eshed is the person who was mentioned very recently on my interview with Professor Avi Loeb. He is the former director of the Israeli space program. And intriguingly, a few years ago, he came out in a Hebrew-speaking newspaper giving comments to a journalist that went far beyond what he'd said in his book. And he talked about the fact that there were agreements in place between the United States government and aliens. He talked about cooperative bases with non-human intelligences on Mars. And he basically asserted flatly that the United States particularly was fully aware of a non-human intelligence. I have pursued Haim Eshed. I've written letters, I've sent messages, I've asked people to go and knock on his door, as have many people. And as Professor Avi Loeb explained to me in the recent interview you can watch on Reality Check, he tried as well. And if Professor Avi Loeb, with his credentials, can't get in the door, it suggests to me very strongly that Haim Eshed is being protected and perhaps stopped from speaking publicly. I hope that's not the case, because Israel is a democracy last time I checked. Okay, Stream Tabulous question. As an Aussie, and you know the comment quote, on fear of coming forward as a whistleblower via those you talked to, and of the appalling Australian Whistleblower Protection Act, I refer to the soldier that came forward on war crimes that was hit hard with jail time, etc. Do you think US Whistleblower Act would be enough? That's a question from an Australian viewer about a case that's just been in the news in Australia involving a former lawyer who was working very closely with Australian Special Forces in Afghanistan called David McBride. And David, sadly, was sent to jail just recently because he leaked classified documents to Australia's public broadcaster, the ABC. Look, firstly, David didn't give evidence on war crimes. The irony is David leaked the documents because he genuinely believed that they didn't show war crimes. But what he did do was he leaked classified documents with secret and top secret clearances on them, I think with the classifications. Correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure you will. But the huge problem is, as journalists, we all know that when whistleblowers come to us with documents, as they have done to me in the past, and they offer me classified material, we can all get into trouble. And one of the things I want to make very clear is here on Reality Check and at NewsNation, we have a huge respect for national security. Documents are kept confidential for a reason. This is why, even though I have respect for his motivations in creating WikiLeaks, I honestly don't think Julian Assange is a journalist, because he leaked classified documents without thinking of the consequences of leaking of those classified documents. Journalists are under a very strong ethical obligation to make sure they do the right thing, not only to protect their sources, but also to ensure that we don't compromise national security. And I think, frankly, leaking documents with classifications on them, top secret, secret, anything that's manifestly a secret protected document, it's protected for a reason. And I don't think us as journalists, we as journalists, have the right to leak those documents unless there's a very, very good reason for doing so. The best example I can think of is the Daniel Ellsberg case, where he leaked the documents that showed just what a complete lie Vietnam was and how the American public were being deceived about the war. In David's case, in the Australian whistleblower's case, yes, I do think we need much tougher and protective whistleblower laws in Australia. But frankly, even the American ones don't really work. What are we going to see? Any ideas on what the Vatican are going to reveal on the 17th? Well, we do. And in fact, I've done a record for NewsNation on the implications of the Vatican's recent announcement about the decision-making process on how to assess supernatural paranormal phenomena. It's quite fascinating, and I recommend everybody take a look at it. We did an analysis of the law changes, the rule changes by the Vatican, which were essentially an effort to rein in people who've been making what are often bunkum, bogus claims, that's in the Vatican's rulebook, about supernatural and paranormal phenomena. No mention of UFOs there, by the way, but it was interesting. There was a question asked at the press conference about UFOs, UAPs, and boy, you could see the Cardinal tying himself up in knots trying to answer it. It's fun just to see that. The final question is, Ross, what do you know about the successor organisation of MJ12? This is from Jungle World. What do you know about the successor organisation of MJ12, apparently now called Zodiac? Obviously, that would be, as in the past, the only group of men that owns all the secrets in regard to UAPs. Okay, to explain to our audience, MJ12 is a reference to an alleged purported organisation, the existence of which has never been confirmed, that is allegedly the organisation that's kind of like a room full of smoking men in black who sit there smoking enormous numbers of cigarettes and drinking fine brandy and deciding to keep every dark secret about UFOs and aliens from the American public and the rest of the world. And the name MJ12, Majestic 12, is allegedly the the security classification used to describe this group. And it comes because of a series of documents that were leaked, I think in the late 70s, early 80s, which were leaked in a bundle over 2 leaks. I don't quite know what to make of the MJ12 documents. I've heard different stories about whether MJ12 ever was the designation that was used. What I am aware of is that, yes, there is a group of people who are making decisions about whether or not the American public and the rest of the world should be told about this. And you are right, at one stage it was apparently called Zodiac. That's in the rest of your question. What's the name now? Look, I've been told recently a name, and I've also been told recently an organisation. I'm still checking that out. You'll have to watch another episode of Reality Check to find out what I found out. That's all for this week, folks. Lovely to talk to you. I hope you enjoyed this week's show. We'll be back on Reality Check, actually on the road in America very soon, with some more exciting mysteries and investigations. Good to talk to you. Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And please don't forget to click that red subscribe button to ensure you get more of NewsNation's unbiased and fact-driven news coverage.